A 30-year-old Toyota 4Runner with under 7,000 miles on the clock sold at Mecum's Indianapolis auction this past May for $52,800. And by the time we're done here, you're going to understand exactly what's behind that number. Why the old four-wheel drive parked in your driveway is worth more than the internet says it is, which ones are genuinely climbing, and which ones absolutely are not, and how to work out in one afternoon which pile yours belongs in. That 4Runner wasn't a special edition. It was an SR5 with the 3.4 V6 and a 4-speed automatic, the same truck they sold by the tens of thousands, in a beige-brown paint nobody asked for. Mecum guessed 35 to 45,000. It went past that and kept going. The previous best that same auction house had ever gotten for a 96 SR5 across 8 sales in a decade was a little over 28,000 in 2024. Something changed, and it isn't nostalgia, whatever the auction press releases tell you. Nostalgia has been around forever, and it never paid 52 grand for a Toyota with a plastic bumper. I've had the transfer case out of that generation of 4Runner enough times to know the bolt pattern from memory, and I've watched the parts counter go quiet on trucks I used to fix for a living. So this isn't a market report from somebody in a blazer. This is what's actually happening underneath. Two things I want you holding on to as we go. First, there's a stretch coming where I'll explain how Toyota itself paid owners 150% of book value to hand over trucks and have them destroyed, and why that program is part of the reason yours is worth what it is today. Second, near the end, I'll give you the 20-minute check that decides whether you own a $6,000 truck or a $30,000 one. It has nothing to do with the engine, and most people checking a used 4x4 never do it. Let's start with the thing everybody gets backwards. Here's the misconception that makes the whole market look irrational. People assume old four-wheel drives are going up because a generation got sentimental. Middle-aged guys buying back their childhood. That's the story, and it's about a quarter true, and if you stop there, you'll price your truck wrong and you'll buy the wrong one. What's actually going on is a supply problem meeting a repairability premium, and both halves are measurable. Start with supply. There are roughly 289 million vehicles registered and running in this country, and the average one is now 12.8 years old. A record, and the 8th or ninth straight year it's climbed, depending on whose count you use. That sounds like good news for old trucks. It isn't, not directly, because the same data carries a scrappage rate hovering around 4.5% a year. Every year, 4.5% of everything on the road stops existing. Crushed, parted out, rusted past saving. Now run that forward on a fixed population. Toyota stopped building the 80 Series Land Cruiser in 1997. Land Rover stopped shipping Defenders to America in 1997. Jeep ended the XJ Cherokee in 2001. Nobody's making more. So you've got a pool that only shrinks, and it shrinks at compound interest. The way I think about it is the way you think about a good set of hand tools. Not the cheap ones. The ones from a supplier who's been out of business 20 years. Everyone that gets lost, broken, or left in the rain is gone from the world's total supply forever. And the ones still in a drawer somewhere get quietly more valuable every single year without anybody deciding anything. Nobody's speculating on them. The population is just draining. That's half of it. Here's the other half, and it's the half the collector car press consistently misses because they don't turn wrenches. An old four-wheel drive isn't valuable because it's old. It's valuable because it's fixable, and fixability has become a rare and expensive property in a motor vehicle. That's the whole thing. Everything else is decoration. So let's talk about what fixable actually means. Mechanically, because it's not a vibe. Take a 1995 FCJ80 Land Cruiser, since it's the reference point everybody uses. Solid axle front, solid axle rear, coil springs at all four corners. The 4.5-litre inline-six, the 1FZ FE 212 horsepower, cast iron block chain-driven, is so understressed that people run them past 300,000 miles and consider it unremarkable. It was the last full-size Land Cruiser Toyota built with a beam axle up front, and that single fact is doing more work in that truck's value than the badges. Why does a solid front axle matter beyond the trail? Because of what it isn't. A beam axle is a tube with a differential in the middle and a joint at each end. When the joint on the driver's side fails, you replace that joint. You don't replace an assembly. You don't need the truck to tell you anything about itself. The whole front end is about 11 parts you can name out loud and hold in two hands. Compare that to independent front suspension with an electronically actuated transfer case, which is what you get on nearly everything now. On the 2007 and later Tundra, 4Runner, and Tacoma, the four-wheel drive actuator lives inside the transfer case. To change a small electric motor, the shop drains the fluid, pulls the drive shaft, drops the entire case out of the truck, and splits it open. Shops report that job running well north of $4,000, and it's mostly labor, a full day or more of it. The old truck's version of the same failure is a linkage you can reach with your arm. That's the pattern, repeated across every system. The 3.4 V6 in that record-setting 4Runner is a non-interference engine. If the timing belt lets go, the valves and pistons don't meet each other, the engine just stops. Toyota didn't advertise that. They just built it that way because in 1995, the goal was still that the thing survive its owner's mistakes. And the parts interchange is enormous. The 80 series shares a startling amount with the 70 series, and Toyota has been building 70 series chassis continuously since 1984. It's the only Land Cruiser generation that never got a successor. It's still in production, which means a truck you'd call obsolete in a US driveway has a live global parts pipeline behind it, because somewhere there's a mine or a farm or an aid organization that never stopped ordering knuckle bearings. Now, who's buying, and does the money actually exist? This is where I'll be straight with you about the limits of what I know. By the way, whether you drive a Ute, a 4WD, or one of the newer Chinese cars hitting Australian roads, keeping it reliable comes down to what you do before the problems start. That's why I put together the 500,000 kilometer car care Bible. It covers 101 habits that can help your vehicle last longer, the warning signs you should never ignore, and how to spot workshop upsells that quietly drain your wallet. To get your copy, just scan the QR code on screen with your phone's camera or use the first pinned comment below. Hagerty's own survey work puts roughly 3.4 million trucks and SUVs inside their definition of a collector vehicle, out of about 43 million collector vehicles total. Their read is that Gen X and millennials are driving this segment specifically, and that millennials are the group most likely to own a 4x4 older than 2005. More than 40% of the owners they surveyed said they take the thing camping or overlanding. That's not a Garage Queen profile. That's people buying a truck to use. I'll mark that as their data and their interpretation, not mine. I don't have visibility into auction bidder demographics, and I'm not going to pretend I do. What I can tell you from the shop side is that the phone calls changed. 10 years ago, nobody under 40 wanted a 4.0 Cherokee. Now they call about them by trim. Let me put actual numbers on specific trucks, because vague talk about rising values is useless to you. The XJ Cherokee, 1984 to 2001, is the one that surprises people. Hagerty tracks over 300 configurations of it, and the average across all of them is up about 75% since 2020, to roughly $8,400. That's for a truck people were giving away with a bad radiator a decade ago. Auction-only sites show a higher average, around $13,000, but that's a skewed sample. Cars good enough to consign are not the cars in your neighbor's yard. When two sources disagree like that, take the lower one and assume the gap is condition, not momentum. The CJ7 has more than doubled since 2020, from about 10,500 to 23 and change. YJ and TJ Wranglers, in good driver condition, are up around 45% over 5 years. The 80 series is the messy one. One tracker has average sale prices around $27,000. Another has the XJ80 average slipping about $800 in the last year. Both are probably right about their own samples. Condition-graded numbers from Hagerty show the strongest gains at the bottom of the scale. Rough ones have climbed harder in percentage terms than excellent ones. That tells you something important, and I'll come back to it. And then there's the outlier that breaks everyone's brain. The North American Spec Defender 90 Land Rover only brought about 7,000 of them here between 1993 and 1997. MSRP $27,900. Late last year, one crossed the block at $212,800. Meanwhile, a European Spec 300 TDI Defender 90, mechanically the better truck in most respects, sold on the same auction platform for $22,000. Same shape, same mission, 1/10 the money. That gap isn't engineering. It's paperwork and scarcity, and you should file it away as proof that this market is not rewarding what you think it's rewarding. Which brings me to that line in the tariff code I promised you. Under the federal rule, most people call the 25-year rule. A vehicle that's at least 25 years old, measured from the month it was built, is exempt from the federal motor vehicle safety standards. The EPA runs a separate clock at 21 years for original configuration engines. Clear both and the truck comes in as a normal import. 2.5% duty, no compliance work, no registered importer. Here's the part that matters right now. The Section 232 tariffs put 25% on imported vehicles and a long list of parts starting in 2025. When the Supreme Court struck down a big block of tariffs this February, those auto-specific ones survived because they were never issued under the law the court was ruling on. They're still in force, and properly coded, a 25-year-old vehicle is exempt from them. So the government has, without ever intending to, created a category where the old truck is the cheap one to bring in, and the new one carries the penalty. Every January, another model year rolls into that category. That's a structural bid under old four-wheel drives that has nothing to do with anybody's childhood. Set that against what a new one costs. The average new vehicle transaction price this past June was $49,758. Average payment on a financed new car, around $760 a month at an average rate near 9.5%. Full-size pickups average around $65,000. Still with me? Good, because here's where I have to take some of it back. Most old four-wheel drives are not appreciating. I want to be blunt about that because averages are a liar's tool and the internet is full of people using them to talk themselves into a bad purchase. The trucks that are climbing are unmodified, four-wheel drive, documented, and, above everything else, structurally sound. The record 4Runner had 6,151 miles and looked like it had been in a sealed room. The Bring a Trailer data on that same generation is the honest picture. Hundreds of sales, most of them under $20,000. The $40,000 results are real and they are rare, and they're almost all California and desert cars. If your truck lived in a salt state, was lifted on parts store springs, has a rear-wheel drive drivetrain, or has 300,000 hard miles and a stack of receipts nobody kept, it is a good used truck. It is not an appreciating asset. Those are different things, and confusing them costs people real money. And I'm not going to sell you the idea that these are better vehicles than what's on the lot. They aren't, in the ways that keep you alive. A mid-90s 4x4 has crash structure designed to standards that are 30 years stale. Brakes that need a great deal more room than you think, and in a lot of cases, one airbag or none. The reason they're legal to import so easily is that the government decided a truck that old isn't worth regulating. Read that sentence again. That's not a compliment to the truck. Fuel is the other honest cost. A 4.5 inline six moving 5,500 pounds on 1990s fuel injection is going to cost you money every single week, forever, and no amount of appreciation makes that back on a daily driver. The safety item I actually want you to take seriously is the frame. On a body-on-frame truck, the frame is the vehicle, the suspension mounts, the body mounts, the engine and transmission crossmembers all hang off it. Perforation bigger than a quarter is not cosmetic, and it's not a project for the weekend. Trucks have come apart. If you can push a screwdriver through a frame rail, that truck gets trailered, not driven. That's the first half of this, and it's the useful half. If you're finding it worth your time, subscribe. That's the whole ask, and it's what keeps me digging through auction records and court filings instead of guessing. Still to come, the buyback program I flagged at the start, and the 20-minute inspection that decides which pile your truck is in. So, the buyback. In 2008, Toyota extended a 15-year, unlimited mileage corrosion warranty across roughly 813,000 Tacomas from 1995 to 2000 because the frames were rotting from the inside out. And where a frame failed inspection, Toyota didn't repair it. They bought the truck at 1.5 times Kelley Blue Book retail for a vehicle in excellent condition, regardless of what shape it was actually in, and sent it to be destroyed. Owners were walking out with $15,000 for a truck they'd paid $6,000 for. Dealers had rows of them out back waiting to be crushed. That was the generous end of it. A later class action covering 2005 to 2010 Tacomas 2007 to 2008 Tundras, and 2005 to 2008 Sequoias settled in 2016 for a figure reported around $3.5 billion across roughly 1.5 million vehicles, built mostly around inspections and frame replacement. And Toyota admitted no wrongdoing. Think about what that did to supply. Tens of thousands of exactly the trucks we're discussing, taken out of the population deliberately in a single decade by the company that built them. The ones that survived were the ones that lived somewhere dry, which is precisely why the clean survivors today are almost all from the same handful of states, and why the price gap between a California truck and an identical Ohio truck is now bigger than the price of the Ohio truck. Same story on the Defender, for a different reason. It left the US market in 1997 because federal airbag and side impact rules were coming, and the volume didn't justify the engineering. Regulation ended the supply, scarcity did the rest 20 years later. Now let me show you the hand that's reaching for your pocket, because this is the part that actually explains why a truck from 1996 keeps getting more desirable. In November 2020, Massachusetts voters passed a ballot question requiring automakers to give vehicle owners, and any shop the owner chooses, access to the diagnostic data. Their own car transmits wirelessly to the manufacturer, not a legislature. Voters, around 75% of them, more than 2.5 million people, which is about as unambiguous as this country gets about anything. The industry's trade association sued to block it. That's their right, and I'd expect nothing else. But watch what happened next, because this is the part that tells you what they actually think of you. Rather than open the data, two manufacturers, Subaru and Kia, switched the connected features off entirely on new cars registered in that state. Not the diagnostic port, the whole telematics package, the remote start, the app, the roadside features. People who had paid for a car with those features got a car without them and were told compliance was impossible. Subaru's public position was that it wasn't complying with the law, it was avoiding violating it. Here's the number that turns that from a legal dispute into an insult. The safety regulator itself, NHTSA, said it had worked with the state's attorney general to identify a way to comply that did not involve disabling telematics. The federal judge hearing the case used the phrase concerted ignorance out loud in his courtroom, said he was trying to work out why he was as irritated as he was, and in February 2025 he upheld the law. 4 years and change of delay. And in the meantime, the remedy offered to you, the person who voted for it and paid for the car, was to have a feature deleted. That's what you're actually being told. You may have the data or you may have the feature, but you will not have both, and we will decide which. And it isn't a conspiracy, it's just an incentive. Diagnostic exclusivity is worth money. Every hour of warranty and post-warranty work that has to come back to a franchise network instead of the shop down the road is revenue that only exists as long as the door stays shut. Nobody had to plot anything, somebody just ran the numbers. Now put your old truck next to that. It has no telematics to switch off. It cannot be updated into a worse vehicle overnight. Nobody can revoke a feature you paid for because the features are levers and cables. That is not sentiment. That is a property of the machine, and the market has started pricing it, and the people who could have told you this 10 years ago were the ones being paid not to. You know that now, and it doesn't come off once you've seen it. Here's what I keep circling back to, though, and it isn't about companies at all. A 30-year-old truck that still runs is not really a manufactured object anymore. It's an accumulation of decisions. Somebody changed the oil at 4,000 instead of 10. Somebody caught the weeping heater hose before it emptied the cooling system on a hot day and cooked the head gasket. Somebody, in about 2004, spent an afternoon under it with a wire brush and a can of chassis paint for no reason except that it seemed like the right thing to do. And that afternoon is the entire reason the frame is solid enough to be worth 25 grand today. None of those people got credit. Most of them never met each other, and the truck is the only record that any of it happened. That's the part I find genuinely moving about this whole market, and it's got nothing to do with money. Keeping a machine alive is a small act of stubbornness passed hand to hand between strangers. Everyone still on the road is a chain of people who each declined at some specific moment to let it become someone else's problem. The value is real, but it's downstream. What you're buying when you buy a good survivor is 30 years of other people's care, and you can't manufacture that at any price. You can only inherit it and then keep it going and hope whoever gets it after you does the same. So, the practical part. Here's how to find out what you've actually got in order. Step one is the frame, and this is the 20-minute check I promised. Get it up in the air, take a flashlight and a long flat blade screwdriver, and work the rails from front to back. Behind the cab, around the leaf spring and control arm mounts, at every cross member, and inside the rails wherever you can reach. You're not looking at surface rust. Every old truck has that. You're pushing. Firm pressure. If the metal flexes, flakes in sheets, or gives, you're done. That's the answer. A truck with a compromised frame is worth its running gear and nothing else, no matter how good the paint is. Step two is the body mounts and floor pans, footwells, rear wheel arches, under the rear side glass. Same test, same standard. Step three, and only if it passed 1 and 2, cooling system, head gasket history, and driveline seals. On the 80 series specifically, the early 1FZ engines had head gasket trouble before Toyota sorted it mid-production, so pre-1995 gets extra scrutiny. And grease weeping past the front axle joints means budget for a rebuild in there. On any of them, no maintenance records means assume nothing was done and price it that way. Now the decision procedure, because a rule of thumb is worthless here. Find 3 completed sales, actual sold prices, not asking prices, of the same model, same drivetrain, same rough condition, sold within about 300 miles of you in the last 6 months. Take the middle one, that's your real number. Then get a written estimate for everything the truck needs to be safe and usable for 2 more years. If that estimate is under about a third of your middle number, do the work and keep it, you'll come out ahead on any honest accounting. If it lands between a third and a half, it depends entirely on whether you're going to drive it. If it's over half, sell it as is with full disclosure and let somebody with a lift and more free time than you take it on. And if it failed step 1, the correct move is parts and scrap today before somebody gets hurt in it. One more, do not modify it. Every lift, swap and cut you make narrows your buyer pool. The auction results are not kind about this and neither am I. Here's what I actually want for you out of all this. Not a windfall. A November about 4 years from now, where the guy at work is trading in a 5-year-old crossover, eating negative equity, signing up for another 70-something month note at 9.5%, and you spend an afternoon changing your own fluids and your transportation costs for the year are the tires. The bill just never shows up. That's the payoff, and it's a better one than any auction result, because it happens every single month. Now I want to hear the ugly ones. Tell me what you sold and what it would be worth now. Everybody's got one. The XJ that went for $800 because the rear main was seeping. The Bronco somebody let go for a snowmobile. I want the year, the model, what you took for it, and what you'd take for it today if you still had it. I've done it too. I let a solid axle truck go once for money I'd now consider an insult. Because at the time it was just an old truck taking up space. And that's exactly the point. Nobody knows what they're holding while they're holding it. And if you've got the opposite story, you kept it, it's still going, it owes you nothing, put the mileage in there. Those are the comments people scroll for. I read them, all of them, eventually, usually later than I should. If you want more of this, the subscribe button is right there and it costs you nothing. The thing I haven't worked out yet, and I keep running into it, there's a specific mechanical reason certain 1990s trucks survived at 10 times the rate of their direct competitors. And it isn't build quality, because some of the ones that vanished were built just as well. I've got a theory involving where the drain holes went and who signed off on the primer. I'm not confident enough in it to say it out loud yet. When I am, you'll hear it here first. Go put a light on your frame this weekend. Whatever it tells you, you're better off knowing than guessing.